Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz will be joining Francisco Lindor at this year's All-Star game, but Juan Soto will not, at least for now.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Now, the New York Mets get a much-needed off day today after a wild Subway series over the weekend. I broke down the final game of that series on a live stream, and I also talked about Jesse Winker's looming return and who will go down when Winker is activated potentially on Tuesday. So if you missed that show, check that out. But we have now a full day with a day off to lay out and just talk about the All-Star game. So let's look at this roster on the National League side. The starting lineup we already knew, but to reiterate it here, you got Will Smith as the catcher, Freddie Freeman at first, Ketel Marte at second, Manny Machado at third, Francisco Lindor rightfully getting the start at shortstop, and then the outfield is Ronald Acuna Jr., Pete Crow Armstrong, and Kyle Tucker with Shohei Ohtani DHing. Now we know the reserves. Pete Alonso makes the All-Star team, 5th selection as a New York Met. If you look at it, that's 5th selection in really 6 tries, because 2020 there was no All-Star game. The one time where Pete Alonso did not make an actual voted on All-Star game was 2021, when he also won his 2nd home run derby. 2019, he won the home run derby as a rookie and was an All-Star. And then in 2022 and 2023, as well as 2024, he was also named an All-Star reserve. Has yet to get that first All-Star start. Won't happen this year unless Freddie Freeman decides that he's not going to play in the game due to just general health. I mean, he's been playing all year, but he's got a banged up ankle. So it's not outside the realm of possibility that Freddie says, you know what, I'm going to sit this one out, and maybe Pete does get a start. I don't know if you count that as an official All-Star game start. I think you probably should, right? Even though he was not voted in by the fans. But this is a well-deserved honor for Pete Alonso, a lot different than last year, where we were all wondering, okay, well, why is Pete an All-Star when he's had a much worse season than Francisco Lindor, even Brandon Nimmo at the time? This year, there's none of those talks, none of those debates, none of that. He's hit 20 home runs, got 73 RBIs. He's right there within striking distance of the MLB lead, 4 behind Seiya Suzuki. Got a 923 OPS, which would represent his best OPS in a season since his rookie year in 2019, where he had a 941 OPS with the 53 home runs, of course, that year. Largely remembered now as a juiced ball season. Pete's had a great year. You look at his on-base percentage, 380, far better than he's ever put up in the past. 287 batting average, also far better than anything he's done in the past. Pete Alonso absolutely deserves this honor, and it's great, honestly, to me, that he's not going to do the home run derby. He announced that. I'm glad he's not doing it again. It to me has got a little bit stale with Pete Alonso in the home run derby, and I think he will do it again, but maybe take a couple years off. He said he wants to focus on actually getting the rest, getting a break. I think it's pretty mentally draining for Pete Alonso, who's got a lot of high expectations when it comes to going into the home run derby, of wanting to win it when he won it the first 2 times he was in. So now taking a year or a couple years off from it, I think that's a good decision for Pete Alonso. I'm glad he's focusing on just the Mets and winning this season and not worrying about adding another derby trophy to his crown. But then again, he is one away from, I believe, tying Ken Griffey Jr. for the record of 3 home run derby wins. So I would like to see Pete do it again, but maybe in a couple of years. I also love that he said that, if there was an All-Star game at Citi Field, he would definitely do it, or at one of the stadiums he really likes to hit in, like Fenway or Wrigley. I love that. I took it as a subtle shot at the Braves. Who wants to go hit it at Atlanta home run derby? Who cares? So I don't necessarily know if he actually meant it that way, but I took it that way. And again, I'm glad Pete's not doing it. Now, going through the rest of the reserves, Elly De La Cruz made it over Trey Turner. Phillies fans go wild debating that one. I'm sure they're trying to say, oh, Trey should be starting over Lindor. You know what? I already made my case on Lindor when he was voted as the starter. He's been the best shortstop in the National League for the last 3 seasons. So at the end of the year, I'm sure Lindor is going to have the best numbers of all these shortstops. And again, he deserves it. Again, you can argue Trey over Elly De La Cruz. I think Ellie's just a bigger star in baseball right now and does deserve it. You could say maybe Trey Turner should be there over a Matt Olson. Why do we need 3 first basemen? I might agree to that one, but then again, this is an all-star game in Atlanta. Brendan Donovan made it as the Cardinals representative. Eugenio Suarez made it for the Diamondbacks. Hunter Goodman made it as the backup catcher. And then when you look at the outfielders, which we're about to dig into a little bit deeper as we get into the part of this conversation when it comes to Juan Soto getting snubbed, you got Corbin Carroll, Kyle Stowers, Fernando Tatis, James Wood, and Kyle Schwarber. On the pitching side of things, let me pull up the list again here. I did not have it as part of my notes. That's a mistake on my end, but I should go through all the different pitchers as well from the National League side. Edwin Diaz made it. We'll start there. Diaz absolutely deserves it. He's had an unbelievable season for the Mets. He's been so good. And you compare this year to some of his past seasons, 1.80 ERA puts him a little bit behind what he did in 2022 or a full season where he pitched to a 1.31 ERA. But I talked about him the other day as well. You're looking at Edwin Diaz right now, and he is pitching at the level that we've seen when he's at his absolute best. The year before he got to the Mets in 2018, where he saved 57 games and pitched to a 1.96 ERA and struck out, how many was it? Over 100. Let's see. He had 100 and my computer's not cooperating with me. 124 strikeouts in 73 1/3 innings pitched. 2022 had 118 strikeouts in 62 innings pitched with the 1.31 ERA. And then this year, 35 innings so far, 53 strikeouts. He's 18 for 19 in save opportunities, and again, a 1.80 ERA. So Edwin absolutely deserves it. As we roll over here to the pitchers on the National League side, you got Jason Adam, reliever for the Padres, Matthew Boyd, starting pitcher for the Cubs, Mackenzie Gore for the Nationals, Clayton Kershaw is the legend pick. Commissioner selected him. So rightful all-star appearance for Kershaw, not based on performance this year, but future Hall of Famer who just struck out 3,000. 11th all-star game for him. Freddie Peralta, his second nod. He is the Brewers representative. Robbie Ray back in the all-star game for the Giants. Randy Rodriguez, also from the Giants, makes his first all-star, another reliever. Chris Sale, who I'm sure will be removed because he has the broken rib, but he was voted in as an all-star. Not voted in, but named an all-star. Paul Skeens, of course, makes it. Zach Wheeler coming off of a near perfect game, gave up a solo homer. That was it on Sunday in a Phillies win. He makes it, and Logan Webb makes it, as well as Yoshinobu Yamamoto. But let's get to the part of the conversation that I'm sure you're all waiting for. Was Juan Soto snubbed? You look at the outfielders, and we're going to start with the starting outfielders: Pete Crow Armstrong, Kyle Tucker, and Ronald Acuna Jr. Well, you look at PCA. He deserves to start. 23 home runs, 26 stolen bases, leading all NL outfielders in WAR right now because he is an exceptional defensive center fielder, a star on a very exciting team with the Cubs. He absolutely should make it. Kyle Tucker, 17 home runs, 21 stolen bases, a 150 WRC plus, and he's been nearly 1.5 wins more valuable than Soto because he's a very good defensive right fielder. Then you have Acuna, and you can make a case Acuna shouldn't be in because he's only played 40 games. But he's hitting 333 in those 40 games, 452 on base, 565 slug, 9 home runs, a 184 WRC plus. WRC plus is weighted runs created plus, measured hitters on a league average of 100. 184 WRC plus is really good. He's got 2 wins above replacement in just 40 games. So if you extrapolate that over a full season workload, he's playing like an 8-win player. That's really good. And again, the Braves are hosting the All-Star game, so he deserves to start. He is going to star in the Home Run Derby. He's the host for this All-Star break, so I don't think there's any reason to say, oh, Soto should start. I'm cool with him not starting because honestly, if you had to put a starter in for just merit, it should be James Wood. James Wood is leading all NL outfielders in OPS. Remember, this is the guy that the Nationals traded Juan Soto for. He was the headlining prospect. There was a lot of headlining prospects in that deal. C.J. Abrams was a big one at the time because he was a sure thing big league, already in the big leagues. But James Wood was the guy that had the most upside, and now he is the direct Juan Soto replacement for the Nationals. And he's got a 943 OPS, leading all NL outfielders, ahead of Juan Soto, who's at 915. That's the second best mark. You look at weighted runs created plus, 158. Entering play on Sunday, that was 1 point better than Soto's mark. So James Wood absolutely deserves it. 23 home runs, 12 stolen bases. Soto's got 20 and 10, and Wood has been a better defender this season than Soto. So again, no complaints for those three starters and for the first reserve in Wood. Now when we talk about the other reserves, Kyle Stowers from the Marlins, Fernando Tatis Jr. from the Padres, and Corbin Carroll. There is certainly some room for debate, and that's what I'm going to talk about next. Was Juan Soto snubbed? Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can be. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. When I was using Monarch, I was shocked at how much money I was wasting each month on subscriptions. I was hardly using or not using at all. Also, takeout is a quiet killer, I learned. So I've been trying to not eat out as much to protect my finances a little bit. Realized all of this using Monarch. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. I believe we're within 250 now. I really do appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. So when we look at all of the outfielders in the National League, Juan Soto is 7th right now in Fangraphs wins above replacement. He's behind Pete Crow-Armstrong, Kyle Tucker, James Wood, all those guys we've already talked about. Acuna is obviously behind, but hasn't played that many games. You have Fernando Tatis Jr. and Corbin Carroll, who are also ahead of him, as is Andy Pages. Pages is another snub candidate. He was not named to the All-Star team. When you look at the guy that Soto has been much better than this year, who is an all-star, you got to look squarely at Kyle Stowers. But he was the Marlins' lone all-star. And I understand every year we want to look at the guy that's on the bad team that's named an all-star, and we say, that's ridiculous. It's a stupid rule. We shouldn't have it. But if you're a Marlins fan and you don't want to just tune out for the next week when you get to the all-star break, it is nice to have somebody there to watch. And Kyle Stowers is a good story. Yes, if you look at the WAR argument, sure, he's not as good as Juan Soto. And if you look at the offensive numbers, he's certainly not as good. He's in 283, 355 on base, 519 slug, 16 home runs, a 140 WRC plus. So he's been 17 points worse or 17% worse than Juan Soto based on WRC plus. His OPS is let's see. Juan Soto is in like the 915 range, and looking at doing quick math on Stowers, he's at, in the 870 range. So, do the math there, 40, 50 points difference. Yeah, Soto's been a better player, but who else should be an all-star in the Marlins? Edward Cabrera has had a good year, but he's only made 14 starts, 3.41 ERA, and 71 in the third innings pitched. That's not really an all-star. Kyle Stowers, to me, those are all-star worthy numbers. You can look at his numbers and put him up against Fernando Tatis when it comes to offense, and Stowers has been better this year. So I understand he's the first one that people are going to point at and say, come on, Kyle Stowers over Juan Soto. Is that a representation of the best stars in baseball? No, but is that a representation of the best story on the Marlins this year? Absolutely. I think he actually does deserve it. So to me, this really comes down to Juan Soto over Corbin Carroll or Fernando Tatis Jr. Those are the guys that got in that are not the only all-stars for their team, that I think Juan Soto has had a better season than. You look at Corbin Carroll, he is out OPSing him by about 15 points, 16 points going into play on Sunday. WRC plus 13 points higher, so he has been a better offensive player. They have the exact same amount of home runs and stolen bases. Soto has 7 more RBIs. There's a very slight edge for Corbin Carroll when it comes to WAR, just based on the defense, but we're talking about not even half of a win of difference. It's a 0.3 WAR difference. That's not enough to put Carroll over Soto. Carroll is not a bigger star than Juan Soto, and the Diamondbacks have other all-stars. Ketel Marte is starting, and Eugenio Suarez has had a great season. He's in the all-star game. Why do the Diamondbacks need 3 all-stars? They're a 500 team. They're not a team right now that should be celebrated and put up there as one of the best in the National League. The Mets have been that. And so I really don't understand how you put Carroll over Soto. Yes, those are all-star numbers for Corbin Carroll, but they aren't significantly better or even better at all than the numbers Juan Soto has put up, and he's on a better team. I just don't think Carroll deserves it, and I certainly don't think Fernando Tatis Jr. deserves it. You look at WAR, sure, Tatis is better than both Carroll and Juan Soto. But let's be honest. The All-Star game is not about who is making the best play in right field. It's about the bat. That's what people buy tickets for. That's what people care about. Who's going to hit the biggest home run? And Juan Soto is a significantly better hitter than Fernando Tatis Jr. right now, just in general. His OPS right now, you compare Tatis to Soto, it's more than 100 points worse. You look at the WRC plus, more than 30 points worse. There is no world where Fernando Tatis Jr. should be an all-star over Juan Soto this year. I just am not going to buy into that. It does not make sense to me, especially because this was voted on by the players, I believe, largely. What do players have against Juan Soto other than the contract? Or maybe if they voted really early on this, I don't know exactly when the votes take place. I don't know how it all happens behind the scene. But unless you voted for this a month ago, it makes no sense. Juan Soto has been the best hitter on the planet for the past month. His numbers on the season are far better than Tatis's. Unless we just love defense that much, makes no sense that Juan Soto is not an all-star. The good news is there's always replacements that happen. So I would not rule out the chance that over this next week here, Juan Soto gets added to this roster. There's a very good shot that can happen. I'm trying to think about who might be injured from this grouping of players. No one that jumps out immediately right now, but again, you never know what's going to happen. So I would not say that it's impossible for Soto to be an all-star. He's definitely snubbed, though. He deserves it over Carroll. He deserves it over Tatis. Obviously, just based on stats and merit, he deserves it over Kyle Stowers, but I'm not mad at that one because, again, you need a representative for each team. That's also why I'm not going to make too big of a gripe about Jeff McNeil not being an all-star. I did talk about that a couple days ago after his big home run against the Yankees, how if you really look at it, I believe Jeff McNeil has been a more impactful player this season than Brendan Donovan. Donovan has been healthy. He's been around all year for the Cardinals. But you look at the numbers, I think McNeil has been better. I talked about that on the show a couple days ago. You can go back and hear my argument on it. At the same time, though, the Cardinals have one all-star. It's Brendan Donovan. I don't think Brandon Nimmo quite deserved it. I don't think he was snubbed. If you're just looking at other snubs the Mets might have had, the one guy that you could certainly make a complaint for is Kodai Senga. He's got a 1.47 ERA on the season and 73 and 2/3 innings pitched. He is, supposed to make it back this week, so he will be a healthy player going into the All-Star break. And you look at some of the other pitchers that made it ahead of him, the case is pretty simple. It just comes down to innings pitched. Because if you look at ERA, his ERA is a full run better, if not more than that, for a lot of these guys. Matthew Boyd got a 2.65 ERA. That was in 98 and 2/3 innings pitched so far. Mackenzie Gore, a 3.11 ERA and 104 and a third innings pitched. He also has 131 strikeouts, though. Robbie Ray, a 2.68 ERA and 107 and a third innings pitched. Logan Webb has just gotten over 120 innings pitched, which is insane. He's got a 2.62 ERA. Skeens, Wheeler, no debate there. Kershaw, Legends pick. Yoshinobu Yamamoto has more innings. Freddie Peralta has more innings, and he is the Brewers' all-star. So you do get into that again when it comes to naming a representative for each team. Chris Sale makes it over Senga. Sale will not be pitching. He has the broken rib. He is, though, a Brave, so he gets to stand out there for the lineup and be announced. The fans get to go nuts about that. So no complaints there. He also has had a really good season, 2.52 ERA, 89 and third innings pitched, coming off of Cy Young last year. So I don't really necessarily think Senga should be on there over Sale. And ultimately, just the innings pitched gets to Senga. If he had made 3 more starts and was up over 90 innings pitched with a 1.47, he'd be an all-star. At the same time, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world for Kodai Senga to not have to go there and to just focus on his health right now. So I'm certainly not complaining that Kodai Senga is not an all-star. I just think that if he had been healthy, he would have absolutely made this team. And I will also give a quick shout out to Clay Holmes. He has a better case to be an all-star than you'd think. I've talked a lot about David Peterson, and he certainly has the innings pitched argument, but look at Clay Holmes with a 2.99 ERA, 93 and a third innings pitched. His stats are not that far off from some of these guys that made the All-Star game. So, pretty impressive the performance the Mets have gotten from Clay Holmes. You absolutely can make a case for him or David Peterson if you really wanted to. But ultimately, when you look at the Mets right now, there's one guy that was really snubbed, and that's Juan Soto. He should be there, and he might be when it's all said and done. I don't think that anybody else will get named. I am still very happy, though, that Edwin Diaz is back in the All-Star game. He absolutely deserves it. Pete Alonso certainly deserves it. And Lindor, thank God he finally made an All-Star team as a Met and that he's starting in this All-Star game. That's going to give me something to watch once we get to that next week. Now, in the final segment, I want to do a little fun All-Star topic to close out the show. Of all these All-Stars that we've been talking about, are there any that the Mets can trade for in a couple weeks at the deadline? We're going to go through that to close out the show here in just a minute. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. And get a line graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so which All-Stars could be on the move at the trade deadline? Who is going to have that Jeff Passan tweet come out where it says All-Star blank has been traded from X team to the New York Mets? Who could be on the table? When it comes to the pitchers on the National League side, there's only one guy that I think could be moved, and it's probably doubtful. That's Mackenzie Gore. He's got 2 years of arbitration after this season. So if you just talk about timeline to free agency, this is where a rebuilding team, and the Nationals are certainly still that, would consider moving him. Here's the problem. The Nationals just cleaned house. They fired their longtime GM and longtime manager, Mike Rizzo and Davey Martinez, a shocking move because the Nationals are drafting first overall in a week. They have a trade deadline coming up in 3 weeks. Why are they getting rid of Mike Rizzo, one of the more well-respected, probably one of the more well-connected GMs in baseball right before these pivotal times? I guess if you just don't buy into the vision, you want somebody else making these calls, but you don't have time to find the right executive to lead your franchise. So, I mean, if you want to fire Davey, I guess I get it, but pretty shocking that they cleaned house. With that said, is Mackenzie Gore going to get flipped at the deadline when it's a completely new regime? I really don't know. I doubt that. But again, if you're talking about a guy that is at an all-time high when it comes to value with 2.5 years of control, this would be the time to move him. They would get an absolute haul. He'd be the best pitcher moved to the deadline. I don't think it's going to happen. AL pitchers, there's 4 names to jump out. Chris Bubich, Jacob deGrom, Aroldis Chapman, and Usei Kikuchi. We're going to start from the least likely to be moved, and that's deGrom. Makes a ton of money, has a no-trade clause. Feels like they're trying to build with him, and they're not going to just try to get off the money. But I would love to speak a Jacob deGrom trade into existence. I talked about it on a show last week when I went through the aces the Mets could get at the deadline. I don't think it's realistic. I think it's a complete pipe dream. I don't even know if he'd want to come back to the Mets, and I would probably assume that he wouldn't want to come back to the Mets, but worth mentioning. It's also going to be weird to see Jacob deGrom at an All-Star game in a Rangers jersey. Look just like it's always weird for me to see Jacob deGrom in a Rangers jersey, but I'm glad that he is back where he belongs among the best stars in the game. Now, Usei Kikuchi is an interesting one because he's on a expensive contract, relatively, $21.25 or $225 million a season. He's having a good year, obviously, was an all-star. 2.81 ERA and 18 starts. He was traded at the deadline last year as a rental from the Blue Jays to the Astros, and the Blue Jays received an absolute haul for him. So you would think the Angels would take advantage of this contract that has played out pretty well for them, take advantage of their position to potentially be sellers. But the Angels never sell. So I wanted to mention him because theoretically, if he was put on the table, I like Kikuchi more than Mitch Keller, who I want to talk about on the show because it was floated that the Mets are interested in him. I am not in on that. I sent some tweets out over the weekend about it. I'm going to try to do a segment on it at some point this week. Today just didn't make sense when we had all the All-Star news to discuss. But Kikuchi is an arm that I definitely prefer over someone like Keller, but I just don't know if they're actually going to put him on the table the way that they should. The guy that will be on the table, I think, but probably for an astronomical cost, is Kris Bubic. This is last year's Garrett Crochet with worse PR. Not a guy that is going from reliever to starter. Actually, he was a reliever last year. He was, in the past, a starting pitcher for the Royals 2020 through 2022. Did not fare very well, particularly in the 2022 season, where he pitched to a 5.58 ERA and 129 innings pitched. Starts 2023 and ends up needing Tommy John surgery, out for pretty much all of 2023, most of 2024, but he comes back in July, pitches out of the bullpen, has a 2.67 ERA for the Royals down the stretch. Now he's back in the rotation. He's got a 2.36 ERA with 107 strikeouts and 103 innings pitched. Now, he does not strike out the world the way that Crochet does, not quite as dominant, but you have a guy that is cheap when it comes to his arbitration number with one more arbitration year left. The clock is ticking on his free agency. That's why the Royals would consider moving him. I think it's way more likely that they trade Seth Lugo, who, again, I talked about on that show last week, breaking down some aces that would interest the Mets. Lugo has a $15 million player option that he's absolutely not going to exercise. He's going to hit the market. He's going to get paid. Last chance for Seth Lugo to get a huge 3-year deal maybe. So it makes sense for him to hit the market. The Royals probably can't retain him at the price that he might command on the market. So it makes more sense for them to flip Lugo and keep Bubic around to try to win next year or even have a run at it in the second half. But if he is put on the table, that's a guy to call on because, again, really good ERA, 2.36. He's pitched so well this season. He already has the Tommy John in the rearview mirror, and he's the type of guy that you could trade for and then leverage his final year of arbitration into potentially a team-friendly contract extension. So it's a name to watch. I don't know if the Royals are going to move him, and they might set the price a little bit too high for the Mets to go all in on that one arm. Now, Aroldis Chapman is, well, you'd think he's going to get moved. The Red Sox have not been as competitive as they wished. Ken Rosenthal's come out and said that they are unlikely to move Chapman or anybody that they're trying to win still. But you look at an arm, it's got a 1.29 ERA, 51 strikeouts, and 35 innings pitched, an insane 0.77 whip. If you look at whip, which is walks and hits over innings pitched, anything under 1 is great. You're talking about a whip under 0.8. That is elite stuff. I would hate it, though, because I just don't like Aroldis Chapman, the person. I don't want to see him in a Mets uniform, but he's worth mentioning as a guy that could get traded at the deadline. Absolutely. And you could say, oh, he sucks in the playoffs. He had those bad moments with the Yankees. I was pretty surprised to find out that he has a 2.37 ERA in the postseason over a pretty large volume of innings for a reliever. So, yeah, it's a guy to talk about because if you just look at function on the roster, a left-handed reliever that can throw well over 100 miles per hour, that can be a real compliment to Edwin Diaz, that would make the Mets a lot better. I just don't want them to trade for him. AL hitters. 3 names that theoretically could be moved. Alex Bregman, same conversation with the Red Sox. Are they actually going to sell? If they did, and Bregman is healthy enough at the deadline to be moved, he's got a quad injury. I mean, that would completely change the complexion of the New York Mets if you add Alex Bregman over at third base, an elite defender over there, a guy that has had a great offensive season so far. I think he loves hitting in Fenway. I think part of trading Devers was to try to keep Bregman long-term. So I don't know if he'll actually be moved, but when you're talking about a rental on a bad team, you have to at least mention them. Brandon Lau is an interesting one. He's with the Rays, $10.5 million club option he's playing on this season, $11.5 million club option for next year. terrible defender at second base. The metrics absolutely hate him. But 19 home runs from your second baseman with 50 RBIs. Yes, the Rays are in contention, but this is the time in a player's, path to free agency that they move guys. They set up these contracts with these club options that will start to pay them a reasonable salary. And once they get to that point, north of 10 million, that's where they could trade them. And so I could see the Rays, if the Mets really wanted Brandon Lau, saying, you know what, we'll take Ronnie Mauricio for the next 5 years for Brandon Lau, and you could upgrade your roster right now. We'll take the guy with more control and plug him into second base right now and still try to win this season. Like, that's the type of trade that could be made. I don't think it's the right one for the Mets, but worth mentioning. Byron Buxton. So we're going to be doing a lot of trade deadline stuff over the next week. I've been preparing because I'm actually going out of town for All-Star break, but I'm going to pre-record 5 trade deadline shows. So you're not going to really skip a beat when it comes to Locked On Mets content. And then, of course, if something happens like Francisco Lindor is the All-Star Game MVP or something big news-related, I'll still do audio-only shows. But again, I'm doing a lot of prep work right now. Byron Buxton is going to be featured very heavily in the episode I do where I break down which bat can the Mets get that would complete a World Series lineup. Byron Buxton would be an incredible add. He's had a great season so far, 19 home runs, 15 stolen bases, 138 WRC plus from a center fielder. That is elite stuff. His defense is still at least league average, if not a little bit better than that right now. So he's a really interesting player. He's locked into a pretty team-friendly contract when you ignore the injury history. The injury history is why he signed that contract. But making $15 million per season about when he's healthy, that's as affordable and as good of a deal as you're going to find in the game. But there's the injury history. There's the full no-trade clause. And there's the fact that Byron Buxton has sort of been the Twins guy for a long time. I think that they will very passively entertain some trade talks on Buxton. They'll listen. I think they're going to set the price to a point that no team might really meet, considering some of the questions. But again, I'm going to talk about this more on a show next week because he's the best player that can be added. I think the best overall fit, Byron Buxton in an outfield with Juan Soto and Brendan Nimmo would be unbelievable. All of this brings me to the one National League hitter that I think could get traded. That makes a ton of sense for the New York Mets. Another guy that's going to be featured very prominently on that show next week, and that is Eugenio Suarez, the Diamondbacks' third baseman. Suarez has 28 home runs right now, 73 RBIs, fourth most in Major League Baseball in home runs behind Cal Raleigh, Aaron Judge, and Shohei Ohtani. Those 73 RBIs are tied with Pete Alonso for the second best mark in the National League behind Seiya Suzuki. You look at the average and the on-base percentage, it's in 255, 322 on base. That is right in line with what he did last year, about a 255 hitter, on base around 320. But the slug has jumped about 100 points. He's got a 562 slugging percentage right now. This is a guy that's not a great defensive third baseman, but he's a veteran over there. He's going to play the position better than Mark Vientos does. This is just an absolute upgrade over Mark Vientos. I would honestly consider trading Vientos for Suarez. More on that next week. I think that you'd have to maybe consider making it a larger package where maybe you get a pitcher in this deal as well because you're giving up a lot of control for Suarez, who's a rental. But man, would he change the complexion of the Mets lineup. If you had Eugenio Suarez right in the middle of that lineup, maybe, protecting Pete Alonso, if you went Nimmo, Lindor, Soto, Alonso, Suarez, McNeil as your 1 through 6. I mean, that is as potent as it gets. I mean, to have a pitcher have to go through, and let's just say Nimmo and Lindor both get on, and then to try to get out of the inning, they have to avoid giving up the long ball to Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, and Eugenio Suarez. That would make the Mets a very dangerous team. Also, widely regarded as a great clubhouse guy. I mean, think Eduardo Escobar with way more impact. Yeah, Suarez is a dream rental for this team. He really is. And I would probably say at this point, the all-star that is most likely to get traded to the Mets this year. But we're going to have a lot more on that front coming up in the next week. On tomorrow's show, we'll be talking about the return of Jesse Winker. We'll see if there's any news on Starling Marte, on who's going to go down for Jesse Winker. If he is absolutely coming up, it does appear like that will be the case. We'll also be looking at the rest of this week ahead. Final few tests before the All-Star break. The Mets should get a lot of reinforcements this week. Sean Manaea, Kodai Senga, Jesse Winker. So there'll be a lot to discuss on tomorrow's show. At some point, I want to squeeze in that segment on why I think Mitch Keller is not the right pitcher for the Mets to trade for. So if you don't want to miss that on any of the upcoming Locked On Mets content and you are watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you are listening on the audio side, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Thank you all for consistently making Locked On Mets a top 10 baseball podcast in the U.S. I was looking at some of the numbers over the weekend. I'm blown away by the support, so thank you all for that. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every single day. If you want for your second watch now, check out Locked On MLB Game Night, the show that'll take you around all the action in Major League Baseball with insight from our local experts as well as league-wide experts that'll take you through all of the action. Check out Locked On MLB Game Night on the Locked On MLB YouTube channel as well as the Locked On MLB podcast feed.